What would you do if you discovered the person sleeping next to you had spent 20 years planning to destroy your life? I thought marrying a 73-year-old millionaire was the craziest decision I'd ever make. I was 25, drowning in debt, and desperate to save my dying mother. When Victoria offered to pay for everything in exchange for 1 year of marriage, it seemed like a miracle. But here's what I didn't know. She'd known my father. She'd been watching me for years, and our marriage was just the beginning of her revenge plan, 2 decades in the making. By the time I found her secret diary, it was already too late. Everything I loved was about to come crashing down. But what happened next would change both our lives forever. Let me take you back to where it all began, 6 months ago, when a mysterious phone call turned my world upside down. My name is James Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I made a deal with the devil. Only the devil didn't have horns and a pitchfork. She had silver hair, designer clothes, and a smile that could freeze hell itself. Picture this, a dingy hospital waiting room, the kind where hope goes to die under fluorescent lights, the air thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and broken promises. That's where I was sitting, staring at my phone, watching my mother's latest medical bill load on the screen. Each pixel felt like another nail in our family's coffin. Mom was fighting stage 3 breast cancer, the kind that doesn't care if you're a single parent who spent 20 years raising 2 kids on a teacher's salary. The kind that doesn't give a damn if your husband died, leaving you with nothing but debt and distant memories. The hospital had just called. They were threatening to stop her treatments if we didn't make a payment by Friday. My sister Sarah, brilliant and just 17, sat next to me, her acceptance letter to Stanford crushed in her trembling hands. Her dream school, her future, another casualty of our financial nightmare. Jamie, she whispered, using my childhood nickname. Maybe I should just forget about college, get a job instead. Don't. I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't even think about it. But here's the truth I couldn't tell her. I was drowning. 3 jobs, law school during the day, bartending at night, and driving for Uber on weekends. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight in months. My own student loans were piling up, and now the hospital was demanding another $20,000 by the end of the week. I stepped outside into the rain, letting it mix with the tears I refused to let Sarah see. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. Usually I'd ignore it, probably another debt collector, but something made me answer. Mr. James Mitchell? The voice was like aged whiskey poured over ice, smooth, expensive, with an edge that could cut if you weren't careful. Speaking, I said, already reaching for the end call button. My name is Victoria Blackwood. I've been watching you, Mr. Mitchell. Your dedication to your family is admirable, particularly in light of your current circumstances. My blood ran cold. How do you know about your situation? She finished my sentence with an elegance that felt rehearsed. I make it my business to know things, Mr. Mitchell. Things like your mother's cancer treatments, your sister's Stanford acceptance, your father's unfortunate legacy. I should have hung up, should have blocked the number and walked away. But desperation has a way of making terrible ideas sound reasonable. What do you want? To help you, of course. A pause, calculated and precise. Meet me at the Golden Leaf in 2 hours. I have a proposition that could solve all your problems. The Golden Leaf wasn't just a coffee shop, it was a statement. The kind of place where deals worth millions are made over $15 lattes. I walked in feeling like an imposter in my thrift store suit, rain-soaked shoes squeaking against the marble floor. She wasn't hard to spot. In a room full of wealth and privilege, Victoria Blackwood stood out like a queen among courtiers. Silver hair styled with military precision, clothes that probably cost more than my yearly rent, and eyes. God, those eyes. Blue like glacier ice and just as cold. Sit, she commanded, gesturing to the chair across from her. A cup of coffee waited for me, black, no sugar. She'd already known how I took it. Mrs. Blackwood. Victoria, please. She raised a manicured hand. Let's dispense with formalities. You need money. A significant amount. Your mother's treatments alone will cost upwards of $300,000 over the next year. Then there's your sister's tuition, your student loans, the mortgage your father left behind. How do you know all this? Her smile never reached her eyes. Knowledge is power, James, and I have both in abundance. Which brings me to my proposition. She reached into her Hermès bag, pulling out a manila envelope thick with documents. Marry me. I nearly choked on my coffee. I'm sorry, what? You heard me correctly. 1 year of marriage. In return, I'll pay off every cent of your debt. Your mother's treatments, covered indefinitely. Sarah's education, a full ride to Stanford, including graduate school if she chooses. All you have to do is say 2 words. I do. My mind raced. Why me? Victoria leaned forward, her perfume something expensive and French, filling the space between us. Because you're desperate enough to consider it, but principled enough to honor your commitments. Because you've shown remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. And because something flickered across her face too quick to read. Because you remind me of someone I used to know. This is insane, I muttered. Is it? She opened the envelope, spreading out documents like playing cards. Here's a cashier's check for your mother's immediate medical bills. Here's a letter from Stanford's financial aid office confirming a full scholarship for Sarah Mitchell. And here, she slid over a bank statement that made my head spin. This is what your account will look like the day after our wedding. My hands were shaking. What's the catch? Simple. We live together for 1 year. Attend social functions as a couple. Present a united front to the world. No romantic expectations, no physical requirements. Think of it as a business arrangement with excellent benefits. And after the year, we part ways amicably. You keep the financial benefits. I keep my reasons for this arrangement private. I stared at the documents, at the numbers that could change everything. Mom's treatments, Sarah's future, a way out of the crushing debt that had become my constant companion. I need time to think. Victoria stood, gathering her things with fluid grace. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires. She paused, her hand resting on my shoulder. Her touch was like ice through my shirt. Oh, and James, don't bother investigating me. You won't find anything I don't want you to find. I watched her leave, the click of her heels against marble fading into the ambient noise of the cafe. The documents lay before me like a contract with the devil, salvation with a price tag I couldn't yet see. That night, I sat at my mother's hospital bedside watching her sleep. The machines beeped steadily, each sound a reminder of time running out. Sarah had curled up in a chair nearby, her Stanford letter still clutched in her hands, even in sleep. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. 20 hours left, Mr. Mitchell, tick-tock. I looked at my sleeping mother, at my dreaming sister. Then I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I Googled my father's name, Richard Mitchell. The results were sparse, sanitized. A small-town investment advisor, died of a heart attack 5 years ago, left behind a grieving family and substantial debt. But something bothered me, the way Victoria had mentioned him, that pause before she'd said, unfortunate legacy. There was a story there, buried beneath the surface, another text. The past has a way of repeating itself, James, unless someone breaks the cycle. I closed my eyes, remembering my father's last words to me. Sometimes, son, the right choice feels like the wrong one until it's too late to turn back. At exactly 3:47 p.m. the next day, I walked into the Golden Leaf again. Victoria sat at the same table, as if she hadn't moved in the 24 hours since I'd last seen her. Well? She asked, not looking up from her tablet. I took a deep breath, thinking of Mom's medical bills, Sarah's dreams, and the crushing weight of a future mortgage to debt. I'll do it. Victoria finally looked up, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like triumph. But it was gone so quickly, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Excellent, she said, sliding a thick contract across the table. Sign here, and here, and here. As I signed away my freedom, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, that beneath Victoria's perfectly composed exterior lay a truth that would change everything. I just didn't know how right I was, or how wrong things were about to go. Marriage to Victoria Blackwood wasn't what I expected. Then again, I'm not sure what I expected from a contract signed in desperation and sealed with silent promises. The wedding was a stark affair that lasted exactly 12 minutes. No flowers, no music, just fluorescent lights humming in a courthouse and a judge who barely looked up from the paperwork. Victoria wore Chanel in gunmetal gray, her wedding band a simple platinum circle that probably cost more than my old apartment. You may kiss the bride, the judge droned. Victoria turned her cheek at the last moment. Her skin was cold against my lips. That night, I moved into what would become my gilded prison, Blackwood Estate. From the outside, it was everything you'd expect from old money. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, manicured gardens, and wrought iron gates that closed with the finality of a tomb door. But inside was different. My first night there, I couldn't sleep. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the mattress memory foam, but everything felt wrong. Around 3 a.m., I started wandering the halls. That's when I first noticed the photographs. They lined the corridors like silent witnesses, hundreds of them, spanning decades. Victoria, through the years, always immaculate, always poised. But it was the man beside her in the older photos that caught my attention. Harold Blackwood, I assumed, her late husband. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed at odds with Victoria's glacial perfection. Can't sleep? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Victoria stood at the end of the hall, wrapped in a silk robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked almost human. "Just exploring," I said. "Careful, James." She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. Some doors in this house are better left closed. I would learn just how true those words were 3 days later. The first red flag came in the form of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was passing Victoria's study when her voice drifted through the door, sharp with an emotion I'd never heard from her before. "Everything is proceeding according to plan," she was saying. "Yes, he settled in nicely, completely clueless, just like his father. Just like his father." Those 4 words sent ice through my veins. "The accounts have been prepared?" A pause. "Good. Richard Mitchell's legacy ends with his son. Make sure everything is in place for phase 2. I should have confronted her then, should have demanded answers. Instead, I did what any good lawyer in training would do. I started digging. The library became my sanctuary. 3 stories of books, old newspapers, and most importantly, financial records. Victoria was meticulous. Everything cataloged, cross-referenced, perfect. Too perfect. But perfection has a way of developing cracks if you look close enough. It started with a newspaper clipping from 20 years ago tucked between the pages of a ledger. Local investment firm collapses. Hundreds lose life savings. My father's name was buried in paragraph 6. Richard Mitchell, senior investment advisor, could not be reached for comment. Then came the photographs. Not the ones in the hall, but others. Hidden in a locked drawer I shouldn't have been able to open. My father, younger and smiling, standing between Victoria and Harold Blackwood. They looked like friends, family even. But it was the diary that changed everything. I found it behind a false panel in Victoria's study. Amateur detective work I'd picked up from too many late-night crime shows. The lock was old, the kind you could open with a paperclip and patience. The entries started 20 years ago. Harold is gone. They say it was his heart, but I know better. It was shame that killed him. Shame and betrayal. Richard Mitchell, our trusted friend, our family's advisor, nothing but a sophisticated thief. He took everything, Harold. Everything but my will to make this right. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages. The diary chronicled years of meticulous planning, each entry more disturbing than the last. Victoria had spent 2 decades orchestrating her revenge, tracking my father's movements, documenting his weaknesses. And then, after his death, she'd turned her attention to me. Richard's son is everything his father pretended to be. Honest, hardworking, devoted to family. It makes what I must do both easier and harder. But justice demands its price. Harold's death will not go unanswered. The most recent entry was dated just last week. James suspects nothing. The foundation transfer is prepared. Once he signs the anniversary papers, everything will revert to the shell companies. His mother's medical care, his sister's education, all of it gone in an instant. Richard Mitchell destroyed my family with a pen stroke. How fitting that his son will do the same to his own. Finding something interesting, I spun around. Victoria stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall lights. Her smile was the same one she'd worn at our wedding. Cold, calculated, victorious. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Since the day they found Harold." She stepped into the room, each movement precise. "Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love die of a broken heart, to hold them as they realize everything they've built, everything they've worked for, was stolen by someone they trusted? I was a child when all this happened." Yes, she was closer now, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. An innocent child who grew up believing his father was a victim of circumstance, rather than an architect of destruction. How many families did Richard Mitchell destroy? How many lives did he ruin with his pyramid schemes and false promises? Whatever he did, her laugh was like breaking glass. Your father didn't just steal money, James. He stole futures, dreams, lives. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, Harold smiling at the camera. He stole my husband's will to live. So this marriage, all of it, it's just revenge. Justice, she corrected. Poetic justice, the prodigal son, so desperate to save his family that he walks willingly into the same trap his father set for others. But Victoria had made a crucial mistake. In her years of planning, of watching and waiting, she'd overlooked something fundamental about me. I wasn't just Richard Mitchell's son. I was also my mother's child. And she had taught me that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from revenge, but from turning the other cheek. You know what's truly poetic, Victoria? I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. The color drained from her face. But that's not all. I opened my briefcase, withdrawing a stack of documents. While you were busy plotting your revenge, I was busy too. These are copies of every transaction your husband made before his death, every investment, every transfer, and something interesting caught my eye. I laid out the papers, watching her expression change as she recognized them. Harold wasn't just a victim, was he? He was a willing participant, until it all went wrong. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for the documents. You didn't just want revenge, I continued. You wanted to bury the truth. That Harold knew exactly what kind of scheme he was involved in. That when it collapsed, he couldn't live with his own guilt. You don't understand, she whispered, but the ice in her voice had melted into something more vulnerable, more human. I understand perfectly, and now you have a choice to make. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The perfect backdrop for the moment everything changed. But neither of us could have predicted what would happen next. Because sometimes the greatest plot twists aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that plan us. They say the darkest hour comes just before dawn. Standing in Victoria's study, surrounded by the evidence of decades of calculated revenge and hidden truths, I was about to learn just how dark things could get. Victoria's hands shook as she looked through the documents I'd discovered. Proof that her husband Harold had been more than just a victim. Her perfectly maintained facade was cracking, revealing something raw and human underneath. You don't understand, she repeated, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. Harold was a good man. Good men can make terrible choices, I said quietly, just like terrible men can have good children. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the study in harsh bursts. In those strobing moments, I saw something I'd never noticed before. Victoria's eyes were the same shade of blue as Harold's in the photographs, the same haunted look. 20 years, she whispered. 20 years I've lived with this story. The grieving widow, the victim of Richard Mitchell's greed. It became my identity, my purpose. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw tears in those ice blue eyes. What am I without it? Someone who needs to hear the whole truth, I said, pulling out one final document, a letter I'd found buried in my father's old office, dated the day before his death. Dear Victoria, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not running away this time. My heart's making that decision for me. The doctors give me a week, maybe less. I've spent years carrying the weight of what we did to Harold, what I did. Yes, I designed the investment scheme, but Harold was the one who brought in his friends, his family's money. He believed in me so much that he staked everything on our dream of easy wealth. When it all collapsed, I couldn't face him, or you. So I ran, became the villain in your story because it was easier than admitting we were all guilty. Harold's death destroyed something in you, Victoria. I saw it happening but was too much of a coward to stop it. I'm leaving everything I have to pay back what we took, but I know it won't be enough. Money can't restore lost years or heal broken trust. My son, James, he's a good kid, better than I ever was. Keep him away from all this. Let my sins die with me. Forever sorry, Richard. Victoria's legs gave out. She sank into her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. He tried to tell me at the end. I wouldn't listen. Because revenge was easier than forgiveness, I said. Easier than facing the possibility that the man you loved wasn't perfect. And now I've become what I hated, she whispered. Manipulating you, planning to destroy your family just like She couldn't finish. I sat down across from her, feeling the weight of generations of mistakes and misunderstandings between us. We have a choice to make, Victoria, right here, right now. We can let this poison keep spreading, or we can do something radical. Like what? Like turning this whole thing around. All that money you were going to use to destroy my family? What if we used it to help others instead? Create something meaningful from all this pain. She looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me maybe for the first time. You really are nothing like your father. No, I agreed, I'm not. And you don't have to be the person these last 20 years made you. That night became a turning point. We stayed in the study until dawn, talking, planning, sometimes crying. Victoria shared stories about Harold, not the sanitized saint she'd created in her grief, but the real man, flaws and all. I told her about growing up with my father's shadow hanging over our family, never understanding why he'd changed so dramatically in his final years. 3 months later, we launched the Harold Blackwood Foundation for Financial Justice. Its mission wasn't just to help victims of financial fraud, but to prevent it in the first place through education and support. Victoria insisted on naming it after Harold, not to honor his memory, but to acknowledge that good people can make devastating mistakes. The foundation's first case was personal. We tracked down every family affected by the original investment scheme. Some accepted our help readily, others slammed doors in our faces. But slowly, one story at a time, we started healing old wounds. Victoria transformed. The Ice Queen melted, revealing a woman with a sharp mind for business and an unexpected capacity for compassion. She started hosting support groups in the mansion's grand dining room, turning a space once reserved for power plays into a place of healing. My mother's cancer went into remission that year. A miracle, her doctors said. Sarah thrived at Stanford, eventually joining the foundation's educational outreach program. And me? I finished law school, but with a new purpose. Instead of corporate law, I specialized in financial fraud protection. On our first anniversary, Victoria and I met at the Golden Leaf, the same table where she'd proposed her deal. She handed me 2 envelopes. The first contained divorce papers. The second held a letter. Dear James, how do you measure the weight of 20 years of hatred? I thought I knew. Calculated it in dollars stolen, lives ruined, dreams shattered. I was wrong. The real weight is in the years wasted on revenge instead of living, in the walls built around my heart that kept out not just pain, but love and growth and possibility. You came into my life as a means to an end, the final piece in a revenge plot 2 decades in the making. Instead, you became the key to my salvation. You taught me that the opposite of revenge isn't forgiveness, it's healing. The foundation is yours now. Lead it with the same compassion that showed me a better way. The mansion, too. Turn it into the community center we discussed. Places of pain can become spaces of healing if we're brave enough to transform them. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose a different path. With love and gratitude, Victoria P.S. Harold would have adored you. Today, the Harold Blackwood Foundation has helped over 1,000 families recover from financial fraud. The mansion's gates stay open, welcoming those who need help or hope. Victoria moved to a smaller house nearby, where she mentors young entrepreneurs about ethical business practices. We still have dinner once a month. She sits next to me now, not across a football field of mahogany table. Sometimes we talk about the past, not to dwell in it, but to marvel at how far we've come. The other day, a young woman came to the foundation. Her father had lost everything in a Ponzi scheme, and she was desperate to save her family. As I listened to her story, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance against a legacy of pain isn't revenge. It's choosing to break the cycle. It's choosing to create something beautiful from the ashes of what was broken. It's choosing to let love win. If this story means something to you, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Share your own story in the comments below. When have you had to choose between revenge and healing? What helped you make that choice? Remember, every one of us has the power to rewrite our story, to take the darkest chapters of our lives and turn them into bridges towards something better. The scars of our past don't have to define our future. They can become the map that leads us home.